Hello everyone and welcome to Project Insight's product training webinar. The topic for today is setting up global and resource work calendars. Just a few things to note before we get started. All participants will be put on mute. However, any questions you have are more than welcome. Please go ahead and type those into your question box, which you can find on your GoToWebinar dashboard. We will try to answer all of your questions during the session, but if we can't, we'll make sure to get to you through email before the end of the day, or you can also feel free to email us your questions at info@projectinsight.net. Also, do know this webinar recording will be available within our Project Insight community. My name is Denise, and I'll be your moderator for today. I'm on the marketing team here at Project Insight. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, please feel free to reach me at denise.rodriguez@projectinsight.com. Our presenter and trainer for today will be Angie Smith. She is our partner out in Canada, and she is also PNP certified. Some of the benefits of today's webinar is to understand how to set up non-working times at a global project and task levels, learn how and when to create specific resource work calendars, and know how and when to add multiple work calendars. In our agenda today, we'll go over how to set up your organization's default work days and times, add holidays and other non-working times, shift project schedules and notify project managers, and we'll also learn to create additional work calendars for your global project team. So that's all I have on my end. I'm happy to hand this over on to Angie to continue with the rest of today's webinar. Angie, welcome.
Thank you, Denise. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and show my screen to everyone. And now you should all be seeing the Project Insight dashboard. So intelligent scheduling is a core functionality of the Project Insight project management software. But in order to optimize the intelligent scheduling and reduce the project manager's administrative overhead as much as possible, you need to have work schedules. Now, work schedules in Project Insight are very flexible. You can make them as simple or as sophisticated as you require to match your organization's business processes. Now, default work schedules can be set up at the system level to reflect different geographical areas or other common work calendars. Default work calendars are set up once and used to create project-level calendars, task-level calendars, and user-level calendars. Now, when a resource is assigned to a project, you can set what work schedule they are using: the project work schedule, their personal work schedule, or a custom work schedule set up specifically for that project. For those organizations that have task-specific scheduling requirements, you can assign a work calendar to an individual task as well. Now, only Project Insight administrators can create default work schedules. System administrators and user managers can set calendars for individual resources, and project managers and schedulers can set up work schedules on their specific projects and tasks. And individual users, if you have the setting turned on, can actually edit their own work calendars as well. Now, to start, you're going to set up your organization's default work days and times. So to do that, you're going to set up an organizational default work schedule. And to do that, click on Administration. Click on the arrow next to Projects to expand that section out. Then click on Default Work Schedule. Now you can see that there are several different work schedules already set up. We have the Canadian work schedule, a UK work schedule, and the system default schedule. Now, you must always have a system default work schedule. For a lot of organizations, this is all they're ever going to need. And you can change the name of this to make it more readily recognizable to your team if you wish. So let's click the edit icon on the system default line to change that name. And we're going to type in US work schedule. And then just click Save to save that. Now you can always tell which of your work schedules is the default work schedule because there's no delete or the X icon next to it. So you can never delete your default work schedule. And you must always have at least one in the system. But we're going to go back and we're going to edit that US work schedule again. And we're going to erase the name that we just entered in and set it back to what the default is, which is system default, because that's what a lot of you are going to see when you're using the system. So we're going to keep it set as that for now. But just so you know, you can change the name if you need to. Now, if you have multiple locations with different holiday schedules, then you will most likely use the system default schedule for the location of your head office or where the majority of your project work is done. Now remember, these are default schedules only. They are used to reduce your data entry and maintain consistency when setting up project level, task level, and other user level work schedules. Now to set the default work days and times for your default work schedule or any of the other schedules that you have entered in, all you have to do is click on the work schedule name, and that takes you to your work schedule edit form. And it has your default work days and times and also your holidays. Now this is the same type of form that you're going to use to edit work calendars at the project and user levels as well. So once you've learned how to set it here, you're going to be able to know how to set it on all those other levels. So to keep our form fairly clean here and just concentrate on the work schedule, I'm going to collapse the left navigation. And we'll have a look at Monday first of all, and we can see that our workday is set to start at 8 a.m. until noon. Then there is 1 hour for lunch, then work again from 1 to 5. And if you scroll down, you can see that the rest of the workdays that week are set the same as well. But for Saturday and Sunday, you can see that there are no times entered. So basically, this organization works from Monday to Friday on a regular 8-hour workday, basically from 8 to 5 with 1 hour for lunch. And then there is no work that happens generally on Saturday or Sunday. Now, if these times don't reflect your organization's start and stop times, then that's no problem. You can change them. For example, many of our advertising clients work from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. or later, or sometimes our clients start at 7 a.m. and work until 4 p.m. So Project Insight is very flexible. All you need to do is adjust the times to fit your business. And remember, this is a default. It can all be changed, but just generally what is the time that most of the people in your organization work. For example, here in Canada, a 7.5-hour workday is very common. And if that's the case, you can change the start time to 8:30 for each of your work days. So we'll just click in the start time for Monday, and we'll change that to 8:30. And then we can click into Tuesday and change that to 8:30, and so on. So now, that's reflecting a 7.5-hour workday instead. And that's fine. You know, if your organization works longer or shorter than 8 hours, then all you need to do is put that into your default calendar. Now you'll notice that for Monday and Tuesday, because we changed the 8 o'clock start time to 8:30, it changed the setting over here from use the default to a non-default time. Now, because we're working on the system default schedule, this setting at this point is used more in the back end of Project Insight than with any other kind of user interface. It's just telling Project Insight that you're not going to use the inherent default schedule that's built in, which is this one down here, the 8 to 12. So you can see that for Wednesday, because we didn't change it from that, it's still saying to use the default. But for Monday and Tuesday, since we changed it from that inherent system default, it's just setting it to be a non-default time, so Project Insight knows that. So there's no implications to you as the end user of this. Again, it's more of a back-end setting at this level, just to tell Project Insight that you're not going to use that 8 to 5 schedule. All right, so for now, though, I'm just going to click on Use Default to switch these back to that default just to keep it consistent for all of our workdays. Or you could have also, typed it in and changed it back. Now, there's also some settings over here called, default workday length, default workday start time, default workday end. And these are used in calculating resource workloads and on some other reports where the calculations can't be done on like an individual day, but on an overall basis. So you will want to make sure that whatever you set up in here is going to match what you're going to normally see over here on your work days. So if we had changed this to 8:30 start time and a 7.5-hour day, then you'd want to reflect that your default workday length was 7.5 and that your start time was 8:30 over here. So you do want to keep it consistent, otherwise you're not going to you'll get inconsistent results on between reports and stuff that you run. Now you're also going to want to enter in the average full-time hours per day, per week, and per month. And again, these should match your default workday length and start and end date times. And they're used in some of the reports where you can see, how many full-time employees generally are you going to need versus how many hours. So that's a really handy report a lot of your management team will like. Now the next step is to set up your organization's holidays, non-work days, and special days. So you can go ahead and click on that tab. Now for work days and times, you may decide to use the defaults and not change them. So, you might just decide to leave what's on here. But most organizations are going to want to add in company-wide holidays or shutdowns and special working times. And that's so that your projects won't be scheduled and your staff won't be scheduled to work on those days. Now, by adding in the organization's non-working days, you can ensure that, again, that people aren't scheduled to work on those days. So you can see down here, we actually have a couple of holidays already set up. So we've got December 25th, which is Christmas here, and also in Canada, we get Boxing Day off generally. So we also have the 24th off. But let's start by adding in another common holiday in North America, which is January 1st or New Year's Day. So to do that, we're going to click on the calendar and select the day. So we can just type in the day if we know it, and if you hover, you can see what the date format, it was month, day, year, so you could just type that in. So we could say just 01/01/2016. Or we can also click on the calendar and use the left and right arrow keys to navigate and then just click on the date as well. Now, if you had multiple holidays, you could actually enter them all at once just by using this range feature. So, if you did, for example, I don't know, maybe you had the 4th off for whatever reason, this doesn't happen in North America, but just to show you how it works, is you could put in a range and then specify it has a holiday and add it, and it'll add in all of the working days in that range. But for now, we're just going to revert it back because we just want our one day, our January 1st. We're going to set it as a holiday, and then we want to click on this blue plus sign to add it. And now you can see that, there it is right there, is January 1st, 2016, which is a Friday, has now been set up as a holiday in the system. So you will want to go ahead and set those up for all of your standard holidays that your company takes. But you can also do a few other things in here as well, as set things that maybe aren't so standard but are specific to your company. So for example, let's actually click on the X and we're going to remove December 24th and click OK. So now we just have December 25th and January 1st set as holidays. But what happens if you always give your staff a half a day off on December 24th? So they come in, work in the morning, and then they get the afternoon off. So what we can do is we can schedule that as well. So we're going to click on our calendar and we're going to navigate out to December and we're going to choose the 24th. And we're not going to classify this as a holiday because we're not taking the whole entire day off, but what we're going to classify it as a non-default times working day. So you'll see it goes in and automatically populates this with 8 a.m. to 12 and 1 to 5. And, we can go ahead and just add that, or what we can do is just say, you know what, we're only working 4 hours on this date. So we're going to say we're only working from 8 to 12, and so it's a non-default time, so we're working, but it's 4 hours instead of that regular 8 hours. Then again, you got to click on the plus sign to add it, and then you can see that that is now listed, so it says it's now a non-default time, and here's what our work times are going to be that are applied to that day. So now that you've done this, Project Insight will only schedule your team to work on 4 hours on December 24th, and they won't be scheduled to work on either December 24th, 5th, or January 1st. So the real-world implications for that is that if you have a task that's going to take 5 days, but you have this set up, and if it starts on, the 23rd, your team is going to be scheduled to work 8 hours on the 23rd, excuse me, 4 hours on the 24th, nothing on the 25th, then 8 hours on the, 26th, 27th, probably the 28th, 29th, and 30th, and nothing again on the 1st. So the system's going to extend out the length of the task to, instead of being, like a 5-day duration, it's going to, start pushing it out to be somewhere around an 8 or 10-day duration. So that's basically how that scheduling works. Now, you can also use this to add in working days. For example, if your standard work day, maybe it's a Tuesday to Saturday instead of a Monday to Friday, then you could set it back here so that you don't work on Mondays and that you work Saturday instead. Or if there's only occasional Saturdays that you work, so it's not every Saturday, but maybe it's the last Saturday of every month your team works because they have, some special activities that need to be done. Then you could add in those Saturdays as actually a non-default time because our default for Saturdays are no hours, but in this case we're going to say September 5th is actually a day, and we could add that as well. So you can actually not only, remove working days, but add them in as well. Now you can enter other types of non-work days, such as your holidays, those non-default times, shutdowns, and you can also say non-working time. Now how these are used is there are filters that appear on the time entry grid, and you can choose whether or not to include days marked as holidays, shutdown time, or non-working time on the time entry grid. So whether or not you use those filters are going to depend on the business process for your organization. You can still enter time on these days with the time entry worksheet or the task details form if you need to. Now you're also going to set up your default work schedules when you first implement Project Insight, but you're going to maintain them over time. For example, it is a best practice to enter in all the holidays for the next year prior to starting to plan this coming year's projects. However, sometimes you do need to add in new holidays or adjust your shutdown times or change start and end times after projects have been created. And if that occurs, Project Insight will recalculate the schedules for the active and planning projects that are affected by the changes made. And to do that, you can click on this option to automatically recalculate schedules now for active and planning projects. And you'll get a little message that says this might take several minutes, but go ahead and click OK. Now, you may also choose to send an email to the project managers of all active and planning projects which may be affected by the work schedule changes. So this benefits the project managers as they receive a notification that their project has been impacted. They can review the changes and make adjustments if necessary. Now, you don't have to turn these on. You can leave them off. And if you leave them unchecked, existing schedules aren't going to be automatically updated. However, anytime a project manager or scheduler makes a change in the duration or resource assignment to a task in the project and the schedule needs to be recalculated, it will automatically recalculate it according to the latest default work schedule. So any new tasks you add or changes to the project you make will be shifted with the intelligent scheduling. Now, it's important to note that even though we clicked on this blue plus sign to add it in here, we haven't actually saved this in the system yet. You must ensure that you click the Save option to make those changes in the system. All right, so now that you've got your default work schedule set up, the first place you're going to see where they're used is when you add a project. So let's go back and expand the left navigation. We're going to click on our administration section to collapse it because we don't need to see all that information at the moment. Then we're going to click on our folders to expand that. And we're going to click on our projects folder where we've got all of our active projects stored. Then we're going to go up to the add icon and we're going to add in a project. Now again, once we've got to that point, we can click collapse to collapse the left navigation. And sometimes you'll get your menu options up here. Just click on them to get rid of them. And we're going to type in the name. So we're going to call it our System Upgrade Project. And then you can enter in the other details associated with the project, and those are covered in some other training sessions. But we're going to focus on this one here that says Work Schedule Inherits From. So when you create a project level calendar gets created automatically. And the information that gets put into that project level calendar will inherit the settings from the default work schedule set here when you add the project. So if you click in the drop down, you can see that there's those other three default work schedules that were set up. So you could choose the Canadian one if you were doing this project in Canada. However, for now, we're just going to leave it as the system default, and we're going to save this project. So we're not going to click on Save, we're going to hover on it and click on Save and Display Project. And then your project gets created in the system, so you can see it's created our System Upgrade Project, and it's showing us our task list, which is blank. But the other thing that happened is a work schedule got created for this project, and it took all the information in our system default calendar and put that information in our default project schedule. So to see that calendar, I'm going to hover on the Views menu option and select Work Schedule. And right away, the first thing that you can see is that the default work schedule that's being used to populate the information on our project work schedule was inherited from our system default. Now you can change the information on the project work schedule the same as you changed it on the default work schedules. So you can change the standard, dates and times and non-working days and so on that are applicable only to this project, because remember, it created a calendar with the work schedule that is specific to this project and just based it on our system default. So maybe, work on this particular project has to run after hours, say from 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. to avoid causing problems with, staff working regular hours or the general public or whatever it may be. So you can enter those alternative hours in. Now, the system does do a lot of checking on here, so you can't do things like, change, this field without sort of changing the associated field first. So if you do kind of see it's not taking, it's just probably because you have to kind of do them in the correct order to make those changes happen. So instead of working from 1 to 5, I'm going to get rid of that. So let's get rid of the 1 to 5. And see, I erased the 1, so it automatically erased the 5 p.m. And then we're going to change this 8 a.m. Let's change it to 3 p.m. instead. Or we can change this to 11 p.m. and let's say this is 3 p.m. That's what we want to do. Okay, so if I tried to change this to something later than this, it wouldn't have let me. So I did have to change this one to 11 p.m. first, and then I could change this one to something earlier. Now let's go ahead and click on the holidays, non-work days, and special days. So right now we've got nothing set up here in this calendar specifically, but if you click on inherited days, you'll see the days that got brought over from our default calendar. So it's showing us basically the year is 2015, so it's showing us only the December 25th. If we wanted to see one for January 1st, 2016, we need to click on this next year, and then we can see the holiday set up for the next year. So you can toggle back and forth between the previous year and the next year to see those inherited days from the system calendar. So you can't change these inherited days. That's what the system defaults are used for, is to set that up automatically for your calendars, your work schedules that are set up for your projects. You can't change them. If you did change them in the system default, though, they would update here. So then if you did have some special holidays or non-work days or special days with non-default times, then you can enter those into this specific project calendar. So again, maybe on your team is going to be working on Saturdays just to avoid some conflicts. And then, so we could again do our Saturday, say it's a non-default time, and they're just going to work a regular 8-hour days. And then you need to make sure you have to click the plus sign to add. But we won't enter that in. We're just going to leave that blank for now. And we don't want to make these changes either. So let's just click it back. So we're using our default. And now let's go ahead and let's go back to our views. And we're going to sort of see how this starts to work. So actually, maybe we do. Let's see. Sorry, I'm going to go back to my calendar. Sorry, I'm going to go back to my work schedule. And let's add in our Saturday here. So we're going to add in Saturdays as an actual working time. So I'm going to set it as a non-default time. I'm going to leave it a full work day. So it's a little bit different. So you can see that as soon as I've changed something from my system default now, it changes it to a non-default time. And then we could say that Monday is a non-working day. So instead of Monday to Friday, we're actually working Tuesday to Saturday on these projects. And again, so it's a non-working day, so it's changed the settings so that you know by looking at it. And then you can also see that Saturday, it's a non-default time as pulled from our system default. So that's some informational references that you can refer to. All right, so we're going to save that. So our project calendar has now been set up to have a little bit of a different schedule than our system default. So we're going to go ahead and set up our first task. So to do that, we're going to click in the gray blank line. And we're going to type in our first task, which is, say, let's call it determine requirements. And we're going to put in a duration of 5 days. And it's going to populate our 40 hours of week for us. And then we're going to click Save. So you can see that the start date of the task got scheduled to start today at 8 a.m. and the end date is scheduled for Saturday. So it actually scheduled it so that the team is going to be working on Saturday. If we used our system default calendar and hadn't changed anything, then it would have scheduled it to start on today, but it wouldn't have ended until Monday because Saturday wouldn't have been a working day and it needed 5 days for that task to occur. So not only does a project have a calendar, but each user or resource also has an individual work calendar. And the individual's work calendar inherits the settings from a default work schedule, just like our project's calendar did. So to set the default work schedule for an individual user, let's go back and expand the left navigation. Click on the administration section. Click on users. Then we're going to click on the edit icon for your user. And then we're going to click on the resource info tab. So also in here, you can see there is a work calendar inherits from setting. And again, it's defaulting to the system default, but in this case, let's go and change it to the UK work schedule. And then we're going to go right down to the bottom and save those changes to that user. So you can see now that those default work schedules that we set up over here in the projects section in the default work schedule are used in 2 places. So first, when you add a project, it uses one of the default work schedules as the basis for creating the project level calendar. And secondly, the user's work calendar inherits the settings from there as well. All right, now to see that effect, let's click back on our projects. And we're going to add in another project, but this time instead of going to the plus sign icon, I'm just going to hover on the white space and right-click and select Add and Project. And then now look at it. It says the work schedule inherits from, and instead of the system default, it's using the UK work schedule default. And that's because we set this user, Andrea, had her default work schedule set to the UK work schedule. So if she's adding a project, it's going to use what her default work schedule is and set the project work schedule to that one. And of course, you can always change it if you need to just by clicking in the drop-down. Now you can also do some other things, like you can set the time zone for the project and the user. And if you're setting up calendars by geographical area, then you'll also want to set the time zone to match that area, as well as set the calendar. So associating a project to a specific time zone anchors the project in that time zone, which is useful for global project teams. So we're not going to actually add this, but I did want to show you, where one of the first place it uses that default work schedule set for the user. So we'll cancel out of there. And let's have a look at how you can change the user's work calendar. So again, we want to go back to users in the administration section. And to change that user-specific work calendar, you want to go ahead and click on the calendar icon. So you can see it says click to edit the work calendar for Andrea Smythe. And now you're going to see the work schedule for that resource. And you can see, first of all, that the defaults for her work schedule are set to inherit from the UK work schedule. And that's because we set that as her default schedule. And then also the times that are appearing, this should probably be 8:30, not 8:03. The times that are appearing for those are the UK work schedule. So again, to kind of see where that's coming from, click the back icon, click the edit icon for the resource name, click the resource info, and that's the work calendar that it's inheriting from. And if we click on the default work schedule and click on the UK work schedule, you can see that information is coming from here. So somebody may have already changed that user. So let's go back and edit Andrea again. Oops, sorry, we don't want to edit. We want to click on the calendar icon for Andrea. And okay, so remember it said it inherits from UK work schedule. Well, I'm not using the default for Monday. It's somebody's come in here previously and overridden this to a non-default time and entered in the 803. So if I just click on the use default, it's going to go and set this to whatever was set up in that UK work schedule. Okay, so if we save that, but now let's go back into Andrea and edit her and go to the resource info tab, and let's change this back to the, not the Canadian work schedule, let's change it back to the system default and save. Now if we click on the calendar icon, it's saying it's inheriting not from the UK but from the system default, and it's changed the times to reflect that system default schedule. Now again, these are defaults. We can override these for each individual user. So for example, maybe we want to change this to 8:30 instead of 8 a.m. and maybe our lunchtime is 12:30. So we only get a half an hour for lunch instead of an hour, and then we work till 4. And then you see, as soon as we start making changes to our defaults, it sets it back to a non-default time. So that indicates to Project Insight that this user has times that are different from the default work schedule that's set for them. And it's also an indicator to you as well to tell them that it's a non-default time from the system default. Now for each specific user, you can set not only their work times, but you can also set their personal holidays and other work days. So go ahead and click on that tab. And again, this is the same form that you've already seen. There's just what's different on here is there is different ways to categorize the information you enter. So it's specific now to an individual user instead of the company. So instead of holiday, we see vacation, we see PTO, leave of absence, and we also have a non-default time. Now if you click on the inherited days, again, you're going to see what came from our system default calendar as inherited days off. And again, you can navigate through the different years. And again, you can't change these. These are applied by default. Now, say for example, Andrea is actually going to be away for 2 days next week, maybe Monday and Tuesday. So we're going to add those in as vacation time. So I'm going to click on the calendar and I'm going to say the 7th and I'm going to say the 8th are both vacation times. So I'm going to click on that. And then I'm going to click on the plus sign to add that. And then you can see that both Monday and Tuesday got set up down here below as vacation days for this user. Now, these categories are a little bit different than what we saw on the default work schedule. And again, they're used on the time entry grid, and you can choose whether or not to include days marked as either leave of absence or non-working time on the time entry grid. And you can also choose whether or not to filter days marked as vacation days or PTO days on the time entry grid. Okay, so let's go ahead, because remember, even though we've added them in here, they're not actually saved in the system until you click Save, so make sure that you click Save. And so now we've actually set up a calendar for Andrea as well. Okay, so we're going to return to our project and talk a little bit more about that. So for organizations with more complex scheduling requirements, you can also create project custom calendars in addition to your default project calendar. So let's go back to our projects, and we're going to click on our software development project, and we're going to collapse that left navigation. So maybe, for example, you have a scenario where you're scheduling a go live task of new software to be on a Saturday. And actually, I'm going to go back to projects, and I'm going to go back to the one I added, my system upgrade project. This is the one I just added in. So in this case, maybe we have a go live task that we want to occur again on a Saturday. And maybe you don't want to enter it into our default calendar because it's only really applicable to one task. So we're gonna go to our views, and we're gonna go to our work schedule, and I'm just gonna set it all back to my default. So again, it's gonna be like Monday to Friday, and save that. And then you'll see that it's rescheduled this determine requirements task to not work on Saturday and Sundays, but to work Monday to Friday. So again, it starts today, it's 5 days, so it's gonna go until end of day on Monday. But our next task, let's say maybe it's preparation for go live, and it's also going to be 5 days, and I'm going to add my predecessor, and I'm going to make it my determine requirements, and I'm going to save that. So now it schedules this preparation for go live after our predecessor. So this one ends on Monday at 5, so it's going to start the next day on Tuesday and run for 5 days, which is the following Monday. But in this case, we want to schedule just this task. We don't want to schedule any other tasks. We just want to schedule this task to work on a Saturday. So we don't want to change our project calendar. We want to instead create a custom work schedule for this project that we can apply to individual tasks. So to do that, we're going to hover on views, and we're going to select options. Then we're going to click on the custom work schedules. And then again, we always keep going back to these defaults. So the project default work schedule inherits from the system default. So if you did want to change that, you could change it in here. So we could change it to the Canadian or work schedule. But we're just going to leave it set to the system default, and we're going to add in a new custom work schedule by clicking in this blue bar and entering the name of the schedule. So we're going to make it a very descriptive name, such as a Saturday Go Live. So there's no misunderstanding about what this schedule is. And again, we can select the inherits from. So it does take it from the project default, which again is our system default. Or we can go and change it to any of our Canadian work schedules, our UK schedule, our system default schedule directly, or even Andrea Smyth's personal schedule. So there's lots of options where you can set the default from. So we're just going to leave it as a project default and click Save. So now that schedule is created, and we've got to go and make some changes to it. So again, we do that by clicking on the schedule name. And in this case, we're going to click on holidays, non-work days, and special days. And we're going to click in the calendar icon, and remember this one's scheduled to start here, so we're going to say we're actually going to work on Saturday the 12th. And we're going to say non-default time. So again, our default system calendar said Saturdays were a non-working day, so we're going to change it to a non-default from that, which is a working day for the Saturday. Click on the blue plus sign to add it, and now we're going to click Save. So now the Saturday Go Live has that Saturday the 12th available as a working day. So now we've got our default project schedule, a schedule for our individual resource, and we also set up an additional custom project schedule called Saturday Go Live. So we need to tell Project Insight which one of these schedules it needs to use. So to do that, hover on the views and go to your task list. Now the first rule is that if you don't have a resource assigned to a task, which is the case in this first example, there's no resource assigned, then the task is going to be just scheduled according to the project default work schedule. And again, we can sign to see that it's just scheduling it Monday to Friday, so it's saying that, this first task, which is 5 days starting today, it's going to extend out until Monday. Now, if you have a resource assigned, then different scheduling rules apply. So let's click the edit icon for the task, click on Edit Resources, and then we're going to select Andrea to assign and save that. Now, there is an option in the administration section that sets the system-wide default for what schedule should be used. And now you must be a system administrator to do this. So you can tell it by default, like if you've got a resource assigned, what schedule, because you can pull from a number of different schedules. Remember, there's a project schedule, there's a resource schedule, and there's also a custom project schedule. So you can set which one of those that the system should use by default when doing the scheduling. And to do that, you expand out the left navigation, and in the projects, we want to go to Default Task, Project and Task Options. And there's an option in here that says use the resource's personal work calendar when adding resources to the project. So if this option is unchecked, it means that the project's default calendar is going to be used, which you already saw in that other project we added. But if it's checked, then it means that the user's calendars are going to be used. And again, setting it in here at the administration section just sets it as the default for each new project that's created. But you can override that on a project-by-project basis if you need to. So if you wanted to turn that on and retroactively apply it to all previously created projects, just make sure you click on Apply to All Projects. If that's turned off and you turn it on and save, then it'll only be applied to new projects going forward. But let's go back and have a look at where that's also set at the project level. So click on the Projects folder and click on our System Upgrade project. Again, let's collapse that left navigation so it's not cluttering up our screen. And then we're going to hover on the Views menu option, and we're going to go to Options. So your project managers or your project schedulers can come in here, and they have that same option. So by default, it was turned off. So it doesn't use the resource's personal work calendar when adding resources to the project. But if we wanted to do that, we could turn that on. But we're going to come back to that. So let's just leave it off. I wanted to show you where it was set. So we're not using the resource's personal work calendar. We're using the project calendar. All right, so let's go back to our task list, and we need to have a look at another setting here in Well. So if we hover on Resources and click on Project Resources, you'll see right now that there is just one resource that's assigned to this project, and you can see there's this option here called Work Schedule. So when you add a resource, it does automatically set their work schedule according to that project option. So right now it's using the project default. So if we added in a new resource, let's add in Jill, it's going to set the work schedule to the project default and save it. But if we go and turn that option on, and then we add in a different resource, instead of the work schedule being the project default, it actually gets set to be their personal default. So when we turn that option on, any new resources we added going forward, it's set it so that instead of using the project calendar, it's using the resource's personal work calendar. So again, let's do that again. Let's add in Nick. Leave it as a personal default and save. So now it's using the work schedule. So when it schedules Jill, it's going to use the project default. When it schedules Andrea, it's going to use the project default calendar. But when it schedules Nick, it's going to use his personal default calendar. Now you can change that just by editing, clicking in the drop down. So you could actually set it so that Nick was using the project default and not his personal default. Or again, you could change Andrea so she's using her personal default calendar, not the project default calendar. So it'll go in a certain way, but then you can edit it and change it if you require. Now, in most cases, once you sort of figure out how you want all this to work, you'll just set it in your project and task default options, and you don't have to worry about it so much. But, if there is some anomalies or different ways that you need to schedule, then you can do that. So I've got Andrea set to personal instead of the project. So we're using a couple of different schedules when scheduling. So the next time you edit any task that's assigned to Andrea, this change is going to be applied. And Project Insight does monitor these types of changes in the background and will automatically apply the update as well. It just might not happen instantaneously. So if you want to see these updates, like changing the work schedule and making sure the tasks get scheduled according to the new work schedule, then you can click like the update icon right from here. So now if we click on the Views menu, we can see that our start and our end date of this task changed. So remember, none of this changed, none of the duration or the work hours, but our end date changed. So now it's actually pushed it out. It was scheduled to end on the Monday because we were using the project default calendar. But when we switched it so that Andrea, and remember if we go back in here, we switched it so Andrea is now using, here she is right here, her personal default calendar. It rescheduled that task to incorporate those 2 holiday days that we entered for her. So we said she wasn't working on Monday or Tuesday. So instead of scheduling that task to be on the Monday, it now bumped it out by 2 more days. So it started on Wednesday and ended at Wednesday at 5 p.m. Now to see how this looks on a resource allocation report, we can hover on resources and select resource allocation. And in the dynamic dates, I'm going to actually click in next week. And then I'm going to run report. And then you can see that on the graph for Andrea Smythe, there is no black line for Monday or Tuesday because that resource had no availability for that date. So the black line on this graph represents their availability, and anything below the line means, they've got hours and they're able to be booked. Anything above the line indicates that they might be overbooked. So in this case, it's actually telling me that she is tentatively overbooked on the Wednesday on a planned project. The gray represents planned. So that's kind of how it works on the resource graph. Now there might be some other, remember we kind of forced the update on the project we were on, but she is actually booked on some other projects, a database development. She's actually booked on that project as well. So we'd have to go to that project and change some of those settings so that it's incorporating her schedule, and we'll reschedule it so it's not being worked on those days. Now remember that we also set up a work schedule for that Saturday day for that one task. Let's go back here to our views. So we're going to go to the resources again, and we can, basically you can click on resources or project resources. It's going to take you to the same place. And we can edit Andrea again and click in the drop down. And we can actually choose that custom project calendar that we set up, which is the Saturday Go Live. So if you assign this work schedule to this resource, then all tasks assigned to this resource would be scheduled using that custom schedule. However, maybe you don't want that Saturday Go Live to apply to like every task that Andrea is on. So let's cancel that because we don't want to make that change. And we want to go to the Views menu option, and we want to make that change for this one specific task only. So for each individual task, you're actually able to set the work calendar that's being used. So right-click, and then we're going to go Edit Task Full, and we're going to click Edit Advanced tab. And then on this Advanced Options form, sorry, this is not the wrong place. I don't want to be in there. I'm going to cancel all that. I'm going to right-click, Edit Inline. Sorry, I don't want to do that either. One more. I'm going to right-click. I'm going to Edit Task Full. Then I'm going to click on the Advanced tab. So sorry, now I've got to the right place. So on this Advanced tab, we can see what the work calendar is that's set up. And this is that. So you're assigning the calendar now at a task level. So you only want this calendar to apply to this one task only. So if we click in the drop-down, we can select that Saturday Go Live, and then come down and click Save. And we can also put that on our columns view. So if we go to the display options and go to our column selection options, and we're going to click on admin because we want it to be inserted right before here, and we're actually going to put which calendar that this task is using. And then we're going to scroll way down till we get to work calendar, double click on that to move it over into our selected columns. Then we're going to click our update display options. Then we'll also just click and drag this a little bit bigger. And so now I can see very visually right on my task list view that the preparation for Go Live task is actually scheduled to work on the Saturdays. So you'll see that if we look at the, remember this one's going to start right after our determine requirements. So this one ends on Wednesday, so this one's going to start on Thursday, and it's going to run for 5 days. So it's going to be worked on Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Sunday's not a working day, so that's off, and then it's going to be worked on Monday, that's the 4th day, and then the 5th day is Tuesday, so 5 p.m. So for this one specific task, it's scheduled Saturday the 12th to be a working day. So that brings us to the end of our topics for today's session. You can see that it is very flexible, and you can set up different calendars to handle different scenarios that might be going on in your organization. If you're new to Project Insight, you can just keep it simple, set up your system default and use that, and then sort of grow into calendars too as you start to use them and as your scheduling requirements become a little bit more complex. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand this back over to Denise for some closing slides. Denise.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Angie. All right, so for those of you that are on social media, I'd like to invite you to follow us, like us, and subscribe to our social media channels. Our handle on Twitter is @Project Insight. You can also find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. If you're not already a Project Insight user and would like to learn more, please feel free to contact us via phone, email, or request your demo at projectinsight.net. In our Project Insight community, you'll find many recorded videos and webinars for you to watch and learn from. You can sign up for your next product training, project management training, or IT methodology training. So that is all we have for you today. We'd like to thank Angie for a great session, and of course we'd like to thank our audience as usual for your time, and we do hope to have you on board next time. Thank you so much and have a great day.